Hey, ladies and gents, and welcome to the Controlled Interest Gamecast, where we talk about video games and everything happening in the industry. Episode 169. As always, I'm joined by Dom.
Giggity, giggity.
Giggity, 169. And Jordan.
Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, soon to be released in December of the year of our Lord, 2019.
That's the year of our Lord? What does that mean, that phrase? I've heard that before.
Because the Gregorian calendar is based around the birth of Jesus Christ. So, 2019, the year of our Lord, it's kind of just referencing the fact that it all revolves around that.
So every year is the year of our Lord, Dom. It's not a specific year.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know you
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
that. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say... Never mind. I was going to say something in regards to 169, but we'll move past that.
Nice.
The episode of our Lord, 169.
I was going to be like, is that like a cuck situation? Or is that like a threesome situation?
Oh, my good Lord.
If you're looking at the number, you know what I mean? Anyways.
Jesus.
Off the rails immediately. Year of our Lord.
Consults Urban Dictionary.
Yeah, the
Consult
Lord
Urban
is
Dictionary.
not pleased, Jared.
The Lord will remember that.
Yeah.
Anyways, this is our Game Awards prediction podcast. We're not going to be going over anything we've been playing. We're going to be focusing solely on the Game Awards and what we expect to happen. Before we get into, predicting what we think is going to win and all of that, and some questions I have for you guys in terms of possible reveals, I wanted to first start off by talking about this Death Stranding situation that's revolving around the Game Awards. For those who don't know, Death Stranding is nominated for 8 of the 22 game-centric awards. So this isn't including Esports Player of the Year, Organization of the Year, all that stuff. What do you say?
Conflict of interest?
Exactly. So the producer / host of the Game Awards, Jeff Keighley, who kind of runs the whole thing, he appears in the game. And he obviously has a long track record in friendship with Hideo Kojima.
A big deal when Kojima wasn't able to accept his award because of Konami being assholes, which they were. But boy, oh boy, did Jeff Keighley just milk that sucker.
Yeah. So there's a conflict of interest there. And many people believe that the real problem with it isn't necessarily that it's nominated for a bunch of awards, but it seems as if it's nominated for numerous awards, it doesn't make sense for it to belong next to. Which is obviously a very subjective argument about that. But the other thing is that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order didn't qualify for the Game Awards because it released in a window where people weren't able to play it in time to nominate it. So it's actually not going to be eligible for the Game Awards until next year. And if you're familiar with what's releasing next year, it probably doesn't have a chance next year. So it's kind of in a bad situation there. So that confounds a lot of the issues because one of the year's biggest games and one of, I would assume, is going to be a lot of people's Game of the Year contender in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order isn't on any of these awards lists, which means that there's more room for Death Stranding as well,
It's always weird when a big award show is at the very end of the year because there's got to be a cutoff for
exactly
whatever it is that they're awarding.
Yeah. I personally... Go ahead, Dom.
You might be about to get into it, but Jeff Keighley has said, well, I don't even vote, yada, yada. So he doesn't... Not only does he not have, more of a weight in who wins, but he doesn't vote at all. But there's something to be said about... he sends out the emails to collect all the nominations, and he organizes everything. And, there's endless opportunity, for potential... Corruption sounds like a crazy, intense word considering these are video game awards, but that's what it would be, right? But you're getting into the process as it has been explained is free of that, free of that kind of bias and conflict of interest. So I don't know. It feels weird. It's going to feel weird the way this is.
And I think the biggest thing with Death Stranding as well is that some people are drawing comparisons between this and Red Dead from last year because Red Dead was up for a good number of awards. And people feel that, well, that game was divisive. How come people didn't make such a hullabaloo about that as they do Death Stranding? Separate from the conflict of interest stuff, right? Of it being in categories it shouldn't be in.
Yeah, what categories should it not be in?
I didn't write them down, but there was arguments for art direction and a couple of others.
Sound design, I want to say.
Sound design, yeah.
Yoji Shinkawa did the art direction for Death Stranding. so we will have no further discussion.
Yeah, I
about
don't.
whether they should be nominated.
Yeah, I'm not for like I. That's something I wanted to bring up as a point of emphasis for people who are drawing concerns about this. I personally have no issue with it being nominated. Going back to the
Dude,
Red Dead 2 thing.
That's like the one thing that draws me to Death Stranding. You know, not
Yeah.
the fucking walking around with packages on your back.
The one thing that people have to remember about Red Dead, though, is though it was consumer, on the consumer side of things, it was very divisive. Critically, it scored very high, right? I think it ended up in the 90s. Whereas with Death Stranding, it was both consumer and critic divisive. It didn't necessarily score super high with everybody, and it didn't really end up in the same place that Red Dead 2 did. So I think that's where there's a lot more concern there, because it wasn't this divisive consumer game, but critically super well received. It was divisive across the board, you know.
This is a super interesting conversation, and that's the part of it too that is most interesting, because most of the people that are submitting their nominations, right, are the same outlets that are publishing those reviews, in which there were games this year that aggregately scored reviewed higher than Death Stranding that were omitted. Like a lot of people wanted Fire Emblem nominated, right? And that was I don't know for sure, but I feel like I can say that it scored higher than Death Stranding overall.
It did,
probably, right?
It did. It was the high 80s, whereas Death Stranding ended up around 82, 83.
Okay, so a bit, but enough to it's better according to the critics, and those same critics are supposedly submitting their nominations. So that then you wonder well, where's that disconnect, right? Somewhere in how they're picking reviewers versus how they're picking what games they nominate.
Recency bias as well.
That as well, and you're talking about each outlet.
Death Stranding released a lot closer.
One list. Yeah, so each outlet gets to submit one list of nominations, right? Like one nom for each category, if I'm not mistaken. So it's the kind of collective opinion of that outlet somehow, and how each outlet goes to choose their nomination. Who knows how they could each do it differently, right? So there's a lot of weird potential disconnects there where you can't quite just say, well, this reviewed way better, and why isn't it nominated necessarily? But
it's also weird.
It's a weird thing. You would think there'd be a trend.
I gotta say, it's a little weird that the cutoff was that week. Death Stranding released, then the next week Jedi Fallen Order releases, and that's the cutoff.
What would be interesting to that point, I've thought about it too, is if somehow, I doubt it, but what if it came out that, randomly this year Jeff Keighley decided to make the cutoff, 2 weeks earlier than in previous years.
Yeah.
That would be weird.
Or if Hideo Kojima knew the date long in advance, and that was always the date for the cutoff, but they made sure to get the game right in underneath it.
And actually, that was a good one too, though, because Greg Miller mentioned, and I remember thinking, the developers and publishers probably have no idea when the cutoff is, right? I thought that'd be weird, but apparently they do, because EA apparently was balls to the wall trying to get Fallen Order out to reviewers before that cutoff, and they just couldn't do it because it wasn't ready. So that kind of puts that to bed. But I was kind of surprised to hear that. I thought it was odd.
So I just gotta say, anyone that's surprised by this is just goofy, because obviously the Keighley Awards, as we could call them, are gonna have a bunch of Kojima. That's the year that he couldn't be there, and there's been multiple years of the Game Awards kind of being a little bit too much about Kojima. So when he puts out his new game with his new studio, of course that's what it's going to be about.
Yeah, I think the one silver lining though is, and I'll eat my words if this ends up happening next week, I don't think it's going to run the table and win all of the awards it's nominated for. I don't even think it'll win a majority of the awards it's nominated for.
Now, is this the game with the most nominations?
Yes, by far.
Okay.
Yeah. It's this, and then I would say roughly going through my mind counting stuff, it'd be between Control and RE2 Remake are the other two with quite a number of nominations. But Death Stranding, I think, has at least 3 or 4 more than any other game.
Speaking of, where are you guys on, while we're still on this weird, pre-prediction topic, where are you guys with that, with RE2 Remake being nominated compared to
that was something,
Link's Awakening and so on?
That was something I forgot to write into this, actually, in terms of stuff we were going to cover. My personal opinion, and this is just me, my own hang-up, is I don't think a game that's a remaster should ever be nominated for awards when it comes out, right?
Okay,
But
well,
in the sense of Link's Awakening and RE2 Remake, I think they do enough to change those games to make them newer experiences that I do think there is a justified argument to be made that they can. I think RE2 Remake has a far stronger case, but I do think Link's Awakening also has a case for it as well. So,
and just so we're like perfectly fucking clear on the difference, right? Remaster is an up-resing, like
Yep.
refining the resolution of the game, and remake is rebuilding the game from the ground up.
yeah. So, I
Because for some fucking reason, dude, people just can't figure that out. People are calling like Crash Bandicoot remasters or the Shadow of the Colossus remaster. It's like, dude, this is so far beyond a remaster.
exactly.
Remaster is just taking what's already there and polishing it back up.
It's essentially what you get from the Xbox 360 backwards compatibility boost on Xbox One.
It's
obviously a little bit
easier
more
if
than that,
you-
but
It's easier if you kind of think about it in the movie terms. Like, if you remaster something on Blu-ray, then you're just, like I said, upgrading the resolution. If you remake it, then you're totally redoing it.
exactly.
And that's a little bit different from video games, but it kind of helps just separate them.
So
Yeah,
are we
'cause
all
you
on the
can-
same page, I assume, with this, with the RE2 remake thing?
I think so. I mean, for RE2, I think that definitely is deserving. Link's Awakening is closer to being questionable, but if you're going to play that game, then you got to start to question, like, okay, well, Link's Awakening uses the same story, the same characters, the same map, the same gameplay, really, the same items as the original game, which came out 2 decades ago or whatever. So
Yeah.
at what point is too much the same? You have to figure out where that line is for yourself,
So-
right? And then the title is the same. Is that what it is? Because there's games with different
Yeah.
titles that use more of the same assets than Link's Awakening did with.
Well,
the
with
newer
Link's
version, the old
Awakening, you could
version,
argue
so-
it's a new, a different perspective technically. In terms of gameplay, they changed it so you don't have to keep switching in and out of items. You have the 2 items to be able to use it
Yeah,
at a
that's
time.
true.
I do think there's enough different with it that you can make a case. Like I said before, I think RE2 Remake is clearly like a different game than the original. I think there's a very easy case to be made that it's legitimate in terms of being up for awards. Link's Awakening is the one I think, depending on what side of the argument you fall on, there could be a strong case for it. But yeah, what were we gonna say,
The
Jordan?
interesting thing to think about is, let's take the art direction award, for example. In a remake,
Yeah.
a lot of that work has already
Point.
been done.
Yeah.
And should you, if it's not the same guy or gal doing it, should you credit them? The original on the original game, should you credit the art director on that game? It's kind of weird.
That's even more interesting. That's a good point. Because then on the flip, maybe you wouldn't want to consider this new Link's Awakening for overall game of the year because it's too similar. But the art direction is all brand new.
For
the most
specifically
part,
Link's
right.
Awakening, it's a completely different art style. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe you consider it for that category, but not others for parts that aren't original. It's interesting.
Yeah.
You could go on for this for a while, but it's worth.
I think
mentioning.
it's a game by game basis, and you have to see
Yeah.
exactly what they do with it. I don't think it's every game that falls into X category. You know what I mean? Because like
Right.
we just said, Link's Awakening and RE2 Remake could technically fall into the same category, but one has a very much larger argument as to why it should be considered, and the other one is very questionable. It's where you fall in that
I think-
spectrum.
Once again, it's interesting to draw this back to movies because you just look at the fact that video game remakes, there is something that calls for them remaining essentially the same game, but just being updated to a modern standard, I guess, to put it simply. But the fact is, like with a movie, for example, you can totally change the story, but it just has elements of the original for a remake, right? But that wouldn't really work for a lot of people when it comes to video games, so that's why it comes into the conversation of, is it the same game, just updated graphics, or what? And that line really becomes blurred.
Yeah. So next up, we're going to move on to. I put together a list of possible teases and reveals. So this is a mix of studios and games that have already confirmed that they're going to be at the show, studios and publishers that have a track record of showing up at the show, and maybe some other things that would do well by showing up at the Game Awards, right? So a mix of a couple of different things. So, first up, you weren't here the week when we covered this, Dom, but we talked about Wolfeye Studios, which is the new studio formed by previous producers over at Arcane Studios, the people behind, obviously, Dishonored. And they confirmed that their first game, with a tease of artwork, they confirmed that their first game is going to be revealed at the Game Awards. It's a smaller indie title. Going to be interesting to see if it brings in a lot of those stealth or immersive sim elements from their bigger AAA games. But we'll have to tune in and find out. Next up, Xbox confirmed that both Ori and the Will of the Wisps and Gears Tactics will get trailers at the Game Awards, which is really interesting. Ori and the Will of the Wisps, obviously releasing in early 2020. I believe it's the beginning of February. And Gears Tactics doesn't have a date yet. That's obviously the RTS game set in the world of Gears of War. So it'll be cool to get a new glimpse at that, because I think we haven't seen that since its reveal at E3 2018, I believe. So it's good to know we're going to get another glimpse at that this year. Next up, this is something you guys might remember. During PlayStation State of Play in September, leading up to it, we got some tweets from a company who hadn't tweeted in like 3 years, and that was WB Montreal. And they put up some weird teasers for some owl inspired artwork that obviously had people pushing towards the long rumored Batman Court of Owls inspired game, likely happening in the Arkham universe. I don't see why it wouldn't. And people were upset it didn't show up at State of Play. Now the argument is, well, maybe they just teased it way too early and it's going to be appearing at the Game Awards. Do you guys think that's what the tease was for, or do you think maybe it could have originally been planned to try to hit the State of Play? But just like we saw with The Last of Us Part 2's release date getting changed a month later, maybe they opted out at the last second because they weren't sure the trailer they wanted to show would be accurate by the time the year ended.
Jared, I gotta say, I am a little bit tired with this fucking game that we've been forced to play between WB Montreal and fucking Rocksteady about who's just gonna give us a goddamn Batman game. I am honestly so worn out with these two studios, tweeting a little bit here, tweeting a little bit there. Oh no, it's not a Superman game. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. We're going to just put up these little teasers and little bullshit. It's just like, ugh. I hope it's the Game Awards so we can just like have this shit done, at least for one of these studios, because every year E3 comes around and Game Awards comes around. It's like WB Montreal or Rocksteady. Are we getting a Batman game? Are we getting a Justice League game? And I just don't understand why we're not getting DC comic book games. It doesn't make any sense. They just need to start coming out. I don't know.
Well, it's crazy. You think about, since Dark Knight released, we're going to have the release of Spider-Man, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, which obviously isn't the same caliber, and Marvel's Avengers, right? So there might be a point where we could see Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 from Insomniac before we see Rocksteady's next game, which would be insane.
And if it is Justice League, Superman, whatever, I know they said they aren't doing Superman, but if it's even remotely connected to the Arkhamverse or DC Comics in general, it's going to be like, why? Why did it take so long? Why did you... I don't know if part of the studio splintered. Well, okay. We know it's a small studio, so the fact that they did Arkham VR, it's like... I'm sure that was successful because it's one of the few bigger VR games and it's Batman made by a quality studio, but nonetheless, Marvel games is really starting to pick up, and I think DC is going to need to get back on the train because they were the ones that started it, kind of bringing back the licensed comic book video games, third-person action adventure of a high quality. So it's like, where are you at,
It's these two studios kind of filled the vacuum that was left by Square Enix finally delivering Final Fantasy 15 and Kingdom Hearts 3, right? And obviously Final Fantasy Remake coming up. There does come a point where I think they just need to say anything because at this point the fan base has become so volatile. And I'm not saying you have to feed, volatile behavior, but like I do think there comes a point where it's diminishing returns for not showing your game. And we have heard there's been a lot of turmoil in terms of one of those two studios was making a Suicide Squad game. That movie flopped, so they had to cancel that. Then apparently they were making a Damian Wayne game. That didn't do so well, so they had to cancel that. It's like, at what point do they just go forward with the project and see what works? Because, it's been forever.
See, this is what happens with studios, man, because when Sony Bend is experimenting with infamous games on the Vita and shit like that, and then they eventually make their way around to Dead Don't Ride, which becomes Days Gone, people start wondering, like, what the fuck is going on with the studio? Where's this fucking game that we've been anticipating for, at this point, years? And then eventually your adrenaline just starts to slowly lower, and you're not going to be so fucking hyped for this game forever and ever. So you need to strike while the iron's hot.
And this is going to be a popular take because I know people are so salty about it. But I do think part of me believes, and we'll never know, part of me believes that if Platinum's game with Microsoft Scalebound wasn't canceled, I think it could possibly still be in development. From what we had heard about that game's tumultuous development cycle. So it possibly was the best solution to cancel it because it still might not have been released,
Platinum, nonetheless, you don't have to wonder about like where their next game is because they have like 3 per
5
year.
5 million.
Like.
Yeah. Dom, you haven't really chimed in. I guess I'll give you just a quick question. Do you think Batman appears at the Game Awards?
Batman himself.
Nope.
Nope. We don't see Batman at all.
Okay, Dom, any DC comic book character?
No.
No. No show for everyone. It's going to be funny if it's like a Lego DC game. And Dom's like, God damn it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, no, that's not... He knows what I mean. I mean, like, I'm talking Justice League if it's Superman, Wonder Woman.
A non-Lego DC game.
I mean, like, that's the thing. When we go years and years without a Star Wars game that isn't a Lego game, or years and years, and I'm talking about console, I'm talking about, like, random shit on mobile phones or whatever. When we go years without Marvel or DC, it sucks, man. And Injustice should not have to carry the weight of the entire DC comic book line through the video game universe,
Well, and the cool thing with Marvel is with Marvel's Avengers releasing next year, we'll have 3 straight years of a game from them being released. Spider-Man 2018, Marvel Ultimate Alliance this year, obviously not to the same caliber, and then Marvel's Avengers next year. So, going to be very interesting to see what happens with Batman.
I mean, there's no DC, isometric beat 'em up type of thing, So
yeah.
There's they just put their MMO on the Switch for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, that thing's like 8 years
there
old,
is
man.
DC Universe Online, but it's the MMO thing does make it different.
Next up, the next possible announcement we could see, Nintendo plays very well with the Game Awards. We saw Breath of the Wild there. We saw Breath of the Wild 2 DLC there. Breath of the Wild DLC, not Breath of the Wild 2 DLC.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a jump.
If you guys don't remember, that's where Bayonetta 3 was revealed for the first time.
Yeah.
So that was in 2017.
Right?
Yep. And the collection. Yep. So I have a bunch of, well, I guess not a bunch, 3 Nintendo things that we could possibly see at the Game Awards. 1, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate DLC character number 6. That character is set to release in February. We have no idea who it is.
They have confirmed that they are extending past 5, right?
Yeah. Well, no, it was originally 6. They said they're extending past that, but there's no set after that. So it's like they can just add as many characters as they want. It's probably going to show up. Obviously, Terry just released about a month ago, I believe, following the release of Banjo-Kazooie.
What is he from? Is that King of Fighters?
Yeah, a specific one, though. Dang it, what is it called?
Oh, I don't care about that. But
yeah.
I was just thinking, like, it's weird how, I guess, I mean, there's a Persona character, but I'm thinking, like, Banjo and Dragon Quest. Those are bigger franchises, I mean, who knows? King of Fighters could be the biggest thing in the world, and I wouldn't know it.
My soft prediction, I'm not fully behind it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Sword and Shield entry into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Nintendo's made a really
Gotcha.
good case of bringing in Pokemon from the newest generations. Incineroar was one for Sun and Moon, so
Yeah, dude.
I wouldn't be
He
surprised if
is
they bring
such
somebody
a
in.
powerful character.
Yeah, he's a beast. Next up, Breath of the Wild 2 follow-up trailer. Obviously, we saw the tease of that at E3 this year. And the case with this, as opposed to PlayStation and Xbox, are in a weird case where they can't really show new stuff for the first time or big stuff planning to be launch titles or launch window stuff for PS5 or Xbox Project Scarlet because they want to show those off at their actual reveal events. For Nintendo, they don't really have a new console coming out next year. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it out of the realm for us to see a follow-up trailer for Breath of the Wild 2 simply because that game has been so prominent at the Game Awards. It's almost an annualized thing at this point for Breath of the Wild in some shape or form to show up. So wouldn't be too shocking. What do you guys think? Do you
No.
think because there was only such a brief teaser trailer at E3, you think they'd save that for next E3? Or do you think Nintendo's like, we did that tease and we plan to have something bigger at the Game Awards?
Do you think this game's coming out next year is the important question to answer your question.
I do.
I could see a case, especially because it looks like it's made in engine. This is like what I expected them to do with Super Mario Odyssey, but that never happened. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's the thing. If I'm with Dom, which I think I am for the most part, that it comes out next year, I do think we see a trailer then. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have a title yet, right?
Yeah, we do
Correct.
not.
It's just
Yeah.
they said it was the sequel, so we don't know if it's
So I
two
think it could
or
still
something
be a
else.
quote-unquote teaser trailer, right? But I think we might get the title, probably. That'll probably be the focus of it, of like letting us know exactly what it is. If it's Breath of the Wild subtitle, if it's Breath of the Wild 2, or if it's Breath of the Wild 2 subtitle, who knows? Lastly, we mentioned it previously, Bayonetta 3, right? Had that reveal trailer, has gone off the
that's
face
going to be the one.
face of the earth since its announcement. You think it reappears for the first time, Jordan? We see it again?
It's got to because, like you said, it's kind of been off the face of the earth. I've kind of been holding off on Bayonetta 2 before I figure out when we're actually going to get Bayonetta 3. So I'm ready for news, man, because those are cool games, or at least the first one was, I thought.
And here's the thing.
uh,
Sorry, I thought
I'm
you were going
excited.
to. Apologies.
I'm excited.
The thing with this, too, is people might argue there's no chance we see all three of these things, the Smash thing, the Breath of the Wild, and the Bayonetta thing. But there is a case to be made that between January and June of next year, we're going to be nonstop talking about the PS5 and Project Scarlet, right? Because we're going to see those reveal events. And I think
Okay, yeah.
this is the last time for Nintendo to have the market share of attention before their E3 next year. They'll obviously have those
Mind
directs.
share.
I'm not saying they won't. Yeah, mind share, not market share. And I do think this would be a good point for them to be like, okay, this could be our stage. Let's get out there and show these games. You know what I mean? And this DLC announcement.
It will be very interesting to see how Nintendo handles the passing of this generation, with them obviously kind of having forced themselves out of the generational cycle, or the kind of normalized general cycle, along with Sony and Microsoft. Because last time, they had the Wii U out, and it was a whole different situation for them. Now they have a successful console, so it'll be very interesting to see how they're playing their whole situation, while they have a solid base with the Nintendo Switch already out, and have these new consoles passing through from the other two.
They need to take advantage of that launch date and launch window for the next gen consoles where there aren't like a whole lot of need to play games. And I think that's where Nintendo can really shine because they are in stride on their console, whereas the other two are going to be building up again, So we'll see what happens.
We'll see, man. We'll see, because I would say Microsoft in general is poised to really hit this new gen in stride. And Sony, maybe the upper management and the handling of the back end isn't ready. The marketing and such isn't going to hit it in stride, but it seems like the way that the first and even second party studios are lined up could be really interesting, how they just hit with games, because that's not how it was for the first little bit on PS4. It was not like you were getting all these great exclusives. So if, we're getting Spider-Man 2, Horizon 2, God of War 2 within a soon enough margin, and of course, depending upon if there's like Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima on there as well, it's 2020 is going to be an interesting year for video games, that's for sure.
Speaking of Microsoft, this year at E3, we also saw Elden Ring for the first time, which was the collaboration between George R. R. Martin and Miyazaki and From Software. The announcement wasn't super surprising because it leaked beforehand, which kind of took the steam out of it, unfortunately. From Software has a track record with the Game Awards as well. We obviously saw Sekiro teased there for the first time with a very brief teaser trailer at the beginning of the show. I anticipate seeing it personally. The look at E3 was so brief, and I am still of the opinion that this game hits in 2020, personally. So I anticipate a trailer for Elden Ring. Where do you say that, Dom?
That one, yeah, that's what I was going to come in saying. Is that one I think we definitely see, and probably we get a coming next year, or maybe even
done with
coming
Sekiro
spring next year.
Yeah, like a window, yeah.
Sekiro, that's a good question because they did give out like a tweet or something for the first time a month or two ago or something. I just think it's done. I think they're done.
Knowing Activision, I think if they wanted DLC for that game, they would have greenlit it, and it would have probably been out by the end of this year already, personally. Because Activision published it.
It is weird, like, From Software has done an expansion for
all their
everything
games
since Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1 had expansions, didn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, so all 3 Dark Souls and Bloodborne. It's kind of
depending on how their studio split, we could see the DLC early 2020, and maybe Elden Ring closer to the middle of the year. You never know. So, because they're always working on things too. Their turnaround on video games is pretty impressive as well.
Should I give up on Bloodborne 2? Is it time? I feel like 2020 is about time for me to give up on Bloodborne 2.
I think the end of when the curtains fall for E3 2020 and you don't see Bloodborne 2, or if you don't see Bloodborne 2, I think you should just pretend like it's never going to happen and then be surprised if it ever does happen. I think that's your last bastion of hope.
That's where I'm at, because it is sad right now. I think Elden Ring is a very cool concept, but my God, why? Bloodborne's just been like tossed by the wayside, and these random references in their VR game is just like, it's a mess.
And with Sony too, it's weird because like it's their property to manage.
Yeah.
It's gonna be interesting to see what happens when we hear the full story about that. Lastly, this is one I threw in terms of something that Marvel's Avengers didn't have the best reception at E3. I wasn't as down on it as other people were. It had that other trailer that came out, I think, around maybe mid to late September that showed off Kamala Khan, and that she was going to partially be like the primary character.
Yeah, New York Comic Con was like September, I think.
Yeah. I think that this game needs another trailer on a major stage to win back people after its mixed reception. Because at E3, everyone wasn't down, but there was a good portion of people that... And it's funny, it wasn't even necessarily the gameplay. People were just so polarized by the look of the Avengers that turned away a lot of people. And
with it coming out before E3 this year, that's what's weird about that. Being on a big stage like you're talking about.
I just think it needs to have another mass appeal trailer, and I think the Game Awards is the largest event that they have the opportunity to do so before the game releases. So it'd be dumb for them not to take advantage of that. I wouldn't even be surprised if we get...
If they're going to do it, this is the spot.
Exactly. I wouldn't even be surprised if we get an extended gameplay segment. Like, they're like, hey, we need to show this game off to people. Everyone's still not sold. This is our last opportunity to sell people. And the optimist in me hopes they come out and really wow people. Even if they don't wow, they just get people on like, okay, I'm cool with these designs. I think at the very least they need that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see it.
I cannot believe how... really, I gotta say, petty people were about the designs of like, this doesn't look like, and I'm not even talking about like internet commenters. I'm talking about people on podcasts and shit that are saying, "Oh, that doesn't look like the MCU. It's jarring." I'm like, dude, it's a fucking video game. Even if they had the likenesses and they tried to make it look like them, it wouldn't. It wouldn't look perfect. So, why are you complaining about that? It was so stupid to me.
And we don't need to get on a tangent on this because we had this discussion before. There is a thing to be talked about in terms of them hiring the voice cast that's hired for every video game. But on the same token, they're very good. So that was like, oh, I don't really care how they look. How are they acted? You know, that's what really mattered to me more. Before we get into predicting the game awards, before we close out, real quick, I want us to rank individually these 5 games from least likely to most likely to appear. I'll rank them myself, and then you do the list yourself too, okay? So, least likely to most likely. We're going to be choosing between Final Fantasy VII Remake, Animal Crossing, Cyberpunk, Doom Eternal, and Last of Us. For me, number 5, least likely, Last of Us Part 2. We just got a trailer, we got a date, I think they're holding off. Next, I think Animal Crossing. I don't think it's a trailer necessarily.
Just had the delay, too, with Last of Us.
Exactly. Animal Crossing. I don't think we necessarily need another trailer for that game. People are sold. You're not really going to get anybody new, in my opinion. Next up, Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think it kind of falls into the same category as Animal Crossing. And I just think there's been so much shown of that game that they kind of want to keep what's left secret for that title. Number 2, Cyberpunk 2077. I don't think it necessarily needs another trailer, but I could see CD Projekt Red whipping something together to get people excited for the release next year, especially with the Witcher TV show coming out on Netflix soon. Obviously, it's not super related, but I could see some theming there as well. And number 1, Doom Eternal. I think the delay for this game, I wouldn't say upset people, but it let a lot of people down in terms of it was a game a lot of people were excited to get their hands on and finally play. It definitely hurt Google Stadia out of the door. And I do think that they want to come in and kick people's teeth in with another rock-solid trailer. And the music's great, and Game Awards usually has a lot of music involved, so it'd be dope to see as well. So that's my list. What about you guys? Who wants to go first?
Let me go because I am in 100% agreement with your order, as boring as that is. It's been a minute since we had seen a lot of Doom, like earlier this year, and I feel like last year a little bit too. But it's been a while, and then it got delayed. I think it's time that they're gonna want to remind everybody, like, I know we're slower than we anticipated initially, but this is still Doom, people. So get fucking ready. I could see that. And then what did you have last? Was Last of Us. I don't think that has any chance showing up here.
Yeah.
Jordan? Yeah, so I agree with your 4 and 5. And then for the top 3, I would just say I think you'll probably get a Cyberpunk trailer, or it's quite likely, I should say. Then Final Fantasy, and then sorry, what was it? What was it?
Doom Eternal.
Doom, because, well, mate, I don't know, man. It's just like right after a delay, it's tough to come back and show your game to people,
Yeah. My argument with Doom doing that, though, is that it doesn't have the eyes on it the Last of Us Part 2 does, right? That's a game anticipated by everyone. I think Doom Eternal, for as many people that do love that game and are anticipating that sequel, I do think it's more of a niche audience. So I do think maybe you want to hit and try to get, like we've talked about how big this show is in terms of eyes on it. Who knows? Man, I hope Final Fantasy Remake does the Square Enix thing and we get a trailer without any sound effects and just dialogue.
That's really just a Kingdom Hearts thing, because they have not done that at all with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which makes sense.
Thank God.
I mean, thank God, yeah, not makes sense, but yeah, thank goodness they have not been doing that, because it's weird. I get what they think they're doing with those Kingdom Hearts trailers, but it's not, it's not working that way, the way they want it to.
Let's close out the show now by basically saying what we think is going to win. So we're not saying what we want to win. You could mention that, but the primary focus is on what we think is going to win. So I have 4 categories here, 4 awards. Indie Game of the Year. Okay, nominations. Baba Is You, which personally I'm not familiar with. Disco Elysium, which is a game that's like Game of the Year contender for a lot of people, and isn't really getting talked about outside of like very deep game industry circles. Katana Zero, which I personally loved earlier this year. It was one of those, hey, Jordan asking, hey, Jared, is that game out yet games? The classic. Outer Worlds, which is weird because it's like now they're owned by
Yeah.
Microsoft. It's like, oh, it's not necessarily an indie, but it was
That one, that has me questioning again what an indie game is.
well, it is. It's independently published by, what's the name of the publisher? Private Division.
But aren't they owned? What does that mean though? To be
They're a
independent?
subsidiary, so they're not necessarily the same company. It's just like,
That's some bullshit. That's not indie.
yeah. Well, I mean, Obsidian was independently developing this game before they were purchased. Anyways, last one, Untitled Goose Game,
Yeah.
which everyone's familiar with. What I want to win is Katana Zero. What I think will win is either Disco Elysium or Untitled Goose Game. But for the sake of
Outer
picking one,
Worlds.
I don't think it'll win. I think Disco Elysium will win.
I'm gonna say Outer Worlds.
Yeah.
Easy.
Well, more people are super high on Disco Elysium than Outer Worlds. Like, the people who love Disco Elysium love it, and it goes to what we talked about earlier with the Death Stranding situation of
People
these.
fucking love Outer Worlds.
Yeah, but it's like with the indie thing. Do you think people are going to lean more towards the thing that they could partially see as a AA, AAA game, or like the hidden indie beloved gem? You know.
I
Anyways,
think they're
too-
gonna look at the game that they like that's nominated for an award that they really enjoyed. You know,
Yeah.
and as much as Disco Elysium is an indie darling, it is PC only currently, and it is something that is very niche.
Yeah, that's
Even
what.
like a lot of people that review games will be at these sites nominating or voting may not have played it.
yeah,
That's kind of what I'm thinking too. Where like, now you're talking about individual judges that are voting on this that are 90% of the weight, right? So I'm thinking like, what out of I know a handful, like none of them played Disco Elysium, even though like the few that did, really really love it. I don't know. It just
I
hard for me
would
to
see the
that.
thing for me personally. I think Outer Worlds won't even come in second. I think Untitled Goose Game also was like even more beloved than Disco Elysium in terms of more people talking about it. So, yeah, I guess let's go back to the point of it. So I think Disco Elysium will win. Dom, Outer Worlds.
Yeah.
Jordan, Outer Worlds.
Yeah.
Next up, art direction. We have Control, Death Stranding, Sekiro, Gris, Sayonara Wild Hearts, Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. I want Control to win. I think the art direction of that game is like crazy and weird and all things it's so good. I think though that Gris will probably win art direction. It just seems like
what's funny about Gris,
art game.
Jared? I have not played Gris, but what I have done is when people come over to my house, I'll have music on when we're hanging out. But then I'll also put stuff on the big screen that is just kind of like I'll put on like really beautiful anime that's just muted to go over the music. And a lot of times, it'll be a conversation starter. And I've done this with Gris multiple times now, and it is gorgeous. So I've seen like a huge chunk of the game just watching gameplay of it, because there's no like on-screen prompts or anything like that, so it doesn't look video gamey, and it is a stunning game to say the least. Just kind of watching it be played, which is certainly not something I usually do. I'm not big into Let's Plays or whatever, so that's been really interesting.
What are your guys' choices for art direction?
I'm going Link's
I'll say
Awakening.
Gris.
I'm with you,
I
Jordan.
don't think
Gris.
it'll necessarily win, but it is, like I'm telling you, it is special enough. Maybe not necessarily as a game, but the art direction is spectacular.
Remember, we also want what you think is going to win. So not what you want to win necessarily, what you think is going to win.
I still.
Yeah, I guess I'm just like throwing my hat in for Gris either way.
Okay. Yeah, I just think that it's the art game of this year, and I hate to like
Right. It has
bring
a
it down to that
possibility.
point, but yeah. Game direction. Control, Death Stranding, Sekiro, RE2 Remake, The Outer Wilds. I did my toes in The Outer Wilds. I haven't gone to complete it or anything. I know people really love that game, but I think this is the Hideo Kojima Award, unfortunately. I think Death Stranding is winning this easily. I don't even think it's
Yeah.
a question.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna say Death Stranding wins this one.
And whether it's warranted or
Yeah,
not,
'cause
that's an
he's-
entirely different discussion. But yeah, I think there's no way Hideo Kojima doesn't win this.
He's the big director man. So
Yep.
that's
And lastly, game of the year. I honestly think this is a lot more contentious than people are letting on. I don't think this is necessarily a runaway for Death Stranding, but the nominees are Control, Death Stranding, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, because remember it didn't qualify last year, RE2 Remake, and The Outer Worlds. My dream would be Sekiro or The Outer Worlds. I personally think that Outer Worlds has a better chance than Sekiro of winning, even though I think Sekiro, as much as I've played Outer Worlds, I think Sekiro is a better game overall for me. I think Outer Worlds has a better chance of winning, but if I had to put my money on something in that sense, I would go with Death Stranding, but I don't think it's as easy as a landslide like Game Direction. So,
Ooh, really? Yeah. Interesting. Okay. I'm thinking Resident Evil 2 probably wins, but I don't think Death Stranding has much of a chance. I think it's going to be lower. I don't think that wins. Obviously, I'm with you though, Jared. I wish Sekiro would win. That's what I'm going to vote for, but I don't see that happening, obviously.
Yeah. And so the thing with, before we get to Jordan's choice, for Game of the Year and Game Direction with Control, I think it has really wonderful game direction, but it falters in a couple of spots. And I do think it's a really good game, but it has too many faults for it to hold up against, for me, Sekiro or even the amount of Outer Worlds I've played. So, Jordan, what do you think is going to win, and what do you hope wins?
This is Game of the Year?
Yeah.
I'm just going to give you one answer, and I think it's a little bit of a curveball. Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice.
God, I hope so, man.
The underdog victory. I mean, I don't even know if you can even call it underdog, but that'd be awesome.
Well, the thing, too, is this is like one of the best chances that From Software has to win this award based on its competition. Because even if Elden Ring comes out next year and is phenomenal, you really think it's going to hold up even at the same level with like the Cyberpunks and the Final Fantasy remakes? Like, I think this is one of the better years for From Software to have a chance to win. So who knows? Hopefully that's the case. Anyways, that has been our Game Awards prediction podcast. The Game Awards will be happening this upcoming Thursday, and we will be doing a reaction show to all of the awards, the reveals, the trailers, all of that good stuff, and letting you know what we think about everything. Hopefully Batman shows up. Dom doesn't think he will. And we'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.